Staring up in terror at the voodoo man before me, I couldn't even move as he reached up and put his arms on my shoulders. He was in a pristine white suit that was as white as his skin. His distinctive top hat was replaced by a hat that resembled a sun hat. He took a hold of me and turned me back around to walk back over to the counter where Travis eagerly awaited. "Welcome back, sir," he said with a sense of childlike excitement when a parent returned from an errand. Creel let out a soft chuckle as he pushed me a bit to the counter and stepped around me to join Travis behind the counter. "Travis, be a good boy and wait in the office for me," the voodoo man ordered of his servant, who nodded without question and practically skipped over to the office door in excitement. When the office door closed completely, Creel looked over at me and motioned for me to sit back down in the chair that Travis had made me sit in. I weakly sat back down, stunned by how he looked now. "It's been so many years, little Miss Olivia," he said almost whimsically, placing his hand on the counter and leaning in towards me. "And you certainly grew up to be a charming young woman, with all the same spunk of the little girl who wandered in here hoping for a wish. The reminiscing would have been nice if it was with anyone but King Creole." "Sir, let me go, please. My mother will be worrying about me," I asked of him, not so much begging, but hoping that he would at least release me. He stared at me with those button eyes and offered me a crooked smile. Walking back around the desk, he stood before me with his arms crossed. "Is she now?" he asked, to which I nodded. His smile only grew wider. "You know something, Miss Olivia. You look the spitting image of Mary," he told me, which really caused me to panic. I had read Travis's story and I knew who Mary was and who she was to King Creole. The woman who had been his fiancée and the woman who, whether by choice or by ignorance, had led to King Creole's creation. "Do I?" asked him, standing up from the chair and trying to move away from him, only for him to grab me by the head and shove me back down into the chair. My hands instinctively went to the knife behind my back, and I had to fight the urge to stab him right then and there. "I never really had the chance to meet her," I told him after a moment of regathering my composure. "I suppose you didn't, but I'm sure you learned from Travis," Creel told me as he circled around my chair like a vulture over a dead body. I kept as calm as I could as I watched him circle me. Finally, he stopped in front of me and knelt down, so his button eyes met mine. "You can work here, Miss Olivia. I can offer you some amazing benefits, and I'm sure Travis would be more than happy to have you here," he told me, his smile so wide I was afraid his stitches would rip right through his skin. At that moment I decided to strike. Reaching behind my back, I pulled the knife out and stabbed it right through his face. I managed to drive it right between his eyes and deep into his face. He clearly wasn't expecting me to act out like this, because he stared at me in disbelief and staggered backward as a black sludge oozed from the knife still stuck in his face. Lifting my foot up, I shoved him away and made a break for the door to the shop. Reaching the door, I threw it open and ran out into the streets at a full sprint. I never was the most athletic kid at school, but adrenaline will push you to limits you never knew you had before. I don't know how I made it home, but my next memory is stumbling into the living room and nearly letting out a scream when Mom turned the light on. "You snuck out anyway?" she asked me in a stern voice, which turned to complete worry when she saw my face. She quickly ran over to me and took me into her arms, pushing my face into her chest. It was there that I began to cry uncontrollably. It finally hit me that Travis was gone, and I was never going to get him back. "I'm sorry, Mommy," I mumbled through hiccups and shallow breaths. She softly hushed me and rubbed my head lovingly. This always calmed me down without fail. And when I finally composed myself, I looked at her and wiped my eyes. "Travis runs the shop now. And King Creole has a white suit for some reason now," I said, still not fully understanding what the point of that was. I was worried that it would happen, but it seems that he has his filthy talons into Travis, and I doubt he'll ever let him go. Mom sighed, leading me over to the couch and walking to the kitchen to fix me something to eat. Sighing in defeat, I took my backpack off and opened it, taking Tempe out and giving him a tight squeeze. Mom came back a little bit later and handed me a small little sandwich and milk. Thanks. Setting Tempe aside, I took the plate and glass and started to eat my comfort sandwich. Going over what King Creole had told me, I looked up at Mom with a worried look and finally opened my mouth. He said I look like Mary, I told her, and that sent her into full-blown panic mode. Pack a bag. We're not staying here tonight, she told me quickly, standing up and starting to rush upstairs. I didn't even have time to question her as she quickly ran back downstairs with a bag in maybe less than a minute flat. Have you always had that? I asked her, stunned that she was ready so quickly. She nodded quickly and tossed me another bag that she had from behind her back. Catching it, I looked down at it and opened it up, surprised to find a bunch of neatly folded clothes. That's where my favorite shirt went, I said in glee. Come, sweetheart, we need to put as much distance between you and them, she told me as she started to make for the door. I followed after her quickly as I closed the bag and followed after her as she walked over to the car that we still had in my driveway from my old mother. Wait, you don't know how to drive, I told her, but when I saw her entering the passenger seat, I saw that there was a reason for that. I don't even know how to drive, I told her, handing her my bag. Before she even answered me though, I realized something. Shit. I forgot Tempe. I quickly ran back to the house and grabbed him from his little table perch. Forgot something, Olivia. I flinched in terror as Travis exited the kitchen, a knife twirling around in his hand as he approached me. I gripped Tempe close as I started to back up from him. He continued his approach as he scared and shook his head at me. Attacking my boss like that? You've gotten him very angry at you, he said, cornering me against a wall of the living room and grabbing me by the hair, knife held up to my throat. Don't hurt me, Travis, I begged of him, my body shaking in fear. He seemed to enjoy every second of my torment. He started to push the neck up against my throat. I held my breath so that I wouldn't brush up against the knife with my breathing. He took me by the cheek and softly caressed it, smiling at my squirming. I won't hurt you much, Livy. I'll make sure you're good and dead before I skin you alive. I know you'll make a beautiful doll, he said with a wicked grin as he momentarily took the knife away from my throat. It was a mistake on his part, as I quickly grabbed him by the shoulders and rammed my knee as hard as I could into his groin. He let out a noise between a scream and a moan as he collapsed to the floor, dropping the knife and reaching for his groin. I'm sorry, Travis, but fuck you, I said as I kicked him in the face and quickly grabbed the knife that he had dropped. I handed it to Tempe, and we both ran out of the house as fast as we could. Ignoring Mom's questions as to what happened, I quickly entered the car and threw it into reverse. Or at least I thought I did, because I ended up driving right into the garage door. Blushing in embarrassment, I then actually put it in reverse and exited our driveway. What happened in there? Mom finally asked me, buckling up and carefully taking the knife away from Tempe. Travis was there. He said he was going to skin me and turn me into a doll, I said in fear, my adrenaline pumping at 1,000,000 miles an hour as I drove us in no particular direction. Mom really didn't take too kindly to that, and started to look around in the glove box, pulling out a small pistol. Mom, when the hell did you get that? I asked her, never having known that we had a gun. Oh, I bought it a few years ago from a lovely gentleman in an alleyway, she said as if that was a normal thing to do. I sighed and shook my head, finding the humor in the situation, and letting out a pained chuckle. I tried to think of a place to go, and as I fiddled with my necklace I figured it out. At a stop sign, I pulled my phone out and pulled up the directions for Mama Dupont's. Mom was a little bit less than happy to be going back to a voodoo shop, but I managed to calm her down when I told her that Mama Dupont mostly likely hated Creole as much as we did. Arriving at her shop, I was thankful to see that it was still open this late at night. Hopefully, I wouldn't have to go to school come tomorrow. Knocking on the door to her shop, I was thankful to see her coming to open the door for me and Mom. I was worried this fate had befallen your brother, Mama Dupont said after I got her up to speed. She sighed as she sat down at her counter and offered us some seats to sit down in. That bastard has always loved to play and manipulate his prey. He is also one-minded in the sense of getting revenge on anyone who wronged him. And I'm afraid your little stunt of stabbing him in the face will only make your situation much worse. I rubbed my head in embarrassment and avoided my mom's intense gaze at me. Forgive me, Mama Dupont, but I would appreciate it if you gave me some time with my daughter, Mom said, and I could tell I was about to get an earful. Mama Dupont nodded and left me to my fate as she exited back into her office. You stabbed him in the face? She asked, completely in shock at what I had done. I nodded at her and avoided her gaze, giving Tempe a squeeze to try and protect me. Look, Mom. If I didn't, I don't think I would have been able to escape. He said I look like Mary. That's a pretty big red flag, don't you think? I asked her, and she had to agree with that. If I hadn't have gotten away from Creole, there was no way in hell I would have escaped. All right. I suppose we'll stay here until the morning and we'll figure out where to go from there. Mom stood up and went back into the office with Mama Dupont, probably to talk strategy. I took my backpack off and fished around inside for my snack, also pulling out the little notebook that Mama Dupont had given me. Handing Tempe half of a Kit Kat, I opened up the notebook and read it carefully. Mama Dupont was an amazing artist. Her style was like those who scribbled shadow drawings. Seeing King Creole in her style really sent me shivering at his grotesque look. It was like looking at Tim Burton's doodles of the Voodoo Man. Her entry for him was filled with things I already knew about him. His death and his powers, everything. Flipping to the next page, one came face to face with a page of a suited figure with a deep black shadow to him. Constantine Sinclair, I asked, flipping to his About page and giving it a read. The name sounded familiar to her, but she couldn't figure it out. Reading his passage didn't give me much more information either. Owner of Sombre Rehab Center and piece of shit. Geez, Mama Dupont a little harsh. I wondered aloud as I flipped through the pages. Hearing a knocking at the door, I looked up and over at the door, and nearly shat myself as Creole stared back at me. He waved at me, and pointed at the doorknob. There was no way in hell I was going to do that, so I quickly scooped up everything, and ran into the back office. Creole is at the door, I told them, clinging to everything in my arms and looking at them with fear and terror on my face. They looked up at me and then at each other. Nodding, they walked over to me and helped me quickly pack my things back into my backpack. The charms protecting my shop should be enough to keep him at bay, but only for a little while. Both of you must leave the state. Once you do, that he'll lose track of you. Mama Dupont told us, quickly giving me a soft, almost motherly hug, and letting me go with Mom. Me and her quickly started for the back door. And when we opened it, I barely had any time to react upon seeing Travis standing there. She lifted her hands up to my cheek and held it as I saw the life leave her eyes. But she offered me a smile and managed to croak out some words. I love you so much. Before her arm went limp and she fell into my lap. Her blood got all over me as I hugged her and tried desperately to shake her and wake her up. My mother, Alexandra. The woman who saved me from an abusive mother and had raised me better than I could have ever asked for, died in my arms. I stared up at Travis as he entered the shop and held the knife up to his face, a hand on his face as he giggled at me. I stared up at him, almost ready to accept my fate, before Travis went stumbling backward, and sound returned to my ears as a gunshot rang out, and Travis went stumbling backward into the alleyway. Run, child. Mama Dupont yelled at me as she held up Alexandra's gun, having it still trained on Travis. I couldn't move, refusing to leave my mother's corpse. Mama Dupont came over to me and grabbed me by the collar, pulling me away from Mom despite my protests and screams. She shoved me out into the alleyway, shooting Travis again when he tried to stand back up and stop me. "Mommy," I whimpered, wanting to be with her again. Mama Dupont gave me another hug and gave me a squeeze. "Sweetheart, you need to run. Get as far away as you possibly can. Take this money, get yourself a hotel room, and don't open the door for anyone. Understand me? I'll be there eventually to pick you up," she told me, quickly shoving an envelope into my hands and starting to shove me away. Stumbling forward, it was seeing Creel staring back at me from the front door of Mama Dupont's store that finally got me to run away as fast as I could. I couldn't tell you how I got to this hotel, but I managed to do it. Get me a room and collapse into the bed, finally letting every ounce of emotion out as I cried uncontrollably. I had lost my only parent and it was all my own fault. If I hadn't been so stubborn in going to the Voodoo shop, I never would have lost her. And now I had her die in my arms. And I was truly all alone in the world without her. Pulling Tempe out of my bag after hours of crying, I looked down at him and started crying all over again. "It's all my fault, Tempe," I mumbled to him, almost wanting to fling myself from the window of this hotel and just end it all. Maybe getting to join Mom in whatever afterlife existed. Tempe patted me softly and soon I looked down at him. He was pointing at the door. Raising my brow at him, I sniffled and walked over to the door, venturing a peek out into the hall. I was met with nothing out there. I looked back at Tempe in confusion, but instead of him, I was greeted by Charlie. "I'm sorry this happened, Olivia. I truly am," he told me, which only caused me to start crying all over again. Walking over to me, he wrapped his arms around me and gave me a tight hug, letting me get out all the crying I had left in my body. The knock on the door sent both of us shocked. I had put the "Do Not Disturb" sign up, so this was someone who was truly looking for me. Pushing Charlie out of the way, I quickly grabbed Tempe and ran into the bathroom as the door suddenly began to open. I got into the shower in time to hear a couple of footsteps walk into the hotel room. "I can't believe that idiot is us roped up in his shit again," came an unfamiliar male voice. Whoever this was, he started rummaging through my stuff and flipping things over. "He's got another stupid obsession. Over some bitch as well," he complained. "Can't be that bad. After all, at least it's a woman, and not that stupid puppet he made a whole project out of," came another male voice. This one was much less commanding, and it sounded like he was younger than the other man. He sounded almost approachable. "I could care less about what he's doing. Just find this bitch, so I can get this over with," the first voice ordered as things continued to be flipped and thrown around. I held my breath and Tempe close to me. Charlie had returned to his doll, and it was just the two of us hiding in the shower. I had closed the door just enough to make it seem like it had always been like that. However, suddenly a horrible smell invaded my sense and forced me to cover my nose and mouth. Things started being thrown around inside the bathroom, but I hadn't heard the door open at all. Suddenly the curtain was pulled away and I was face to face with a black creature covered in dripping black sludge. It was almost like some sort of shadow. It let out a soft gurgle noise as it stared down at me. Well, looks like we found Charlie's bitch," came the first male's voice. He came into the bathroom and revealed himself to be a tall blonde man with blue eyes. His look was one of supreme authority. He looked taken right out of an 1800s oil painting. The second man soon poked his head around the corner of the bathroom door and showed him to be a man in a surgeon's uniform with brown hair. Not a bad looker either. Needs a nose job though. Maybe even a little work on her cheeks. He pointed out at me. causing me to curl up in the tub as the two of them approached me. "Let's just kill her and get it over with," the blonde man said, the shadow seemingly agreeing with him, moving closer to me and huffing a noxious, horrible breath into my face, causing me to gag and almost throw up. "Seems like a waste of good material. Besides, Creel told us to bring her in alive," the surgeon said, smiling and taking out a small scalpel, though he never said anything about harming her. I started to hyperventilate and panic as this happened, and as he approached me I passed out from fear and from everything that had happened, hoping to God that nothing too horrible would happen to me.